Hi, I'm sayakatcosplay, and today's video is all about this lovely coat that I have just finished. This is a winter coat that I have made for myself that's based on the winter Jester artwork that came out not that long ago. And I saw that artwork and I went, ooh, empire waist, ooh, embroidery. And my wallet went, no. And I decided to make that coat as an actual winter coat. So not as a cosplay, but as an actual wearable garment that's going into my wardrobe, and I'm going to be wearing this thing all over the place when there is a reason to go somewhere. Because this is an amazing coat. It's actually really, really warm. It's got pockets, and it's fully lined. It's lined in flannel. It's made out of wool, so it's super warm, and I absolutely love the embroidery. I was very lucky. I had somebody custom make this embroidery design for me. They are Beleaf Cosplay. I'll link them in the description box down below. And this embroidery pattern, along with the making of booklets and patterns for this coat, are also available on my web shop. Link for that is also down below. So if you would like to see how I made this coat, stick around and I will show you how this gorgeous thing came into being. For this coat, I used a boiled wool and a flannel from Mood Fabrics, and this gorgeous faux fur trim was kindly provided to me by Shannon Fabrics. They sent me some of the Luxe Cuddle in the color Seal, and it's so soft and it just goes super well with the wool and all the embroidery. All the thread is Robison-Anton thread I got from Red Rock Threads, and I'm going to link where I got everything down in the description box below, so if you are interested in making this for yourself or something like this, you can find all the materials that I used. If you have any additional questions about the making of this coat, don't forget to leave a comment down below. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and maybe subscribe, and also hit the bell notification so you know when I put up a new video. Hi, Editing Sayakat here with a quick pause on the footage, just to let you know that some of this footage is sort of vlog style, some of it's tutorial style. I filmed this over a period of about a month, and apparently I kept changing my mind on how to film this video. Welcome to my ADHD brain, hello. The first part of this video is going to be a lot of testing and figuring stuff out and patterns, and I have a lot of footage of that, so enjoy. Here I have a little test embroidery swatch. So this is the swatch that I got of the fabric before I decided to order it. And it's a boiled wool, so it's got this like really kind of like furled texture, which I really, really like, but I was a little worried that it was gonna embroider weird just because of the texture, but nope, not a problem. So this is one of like my little pre-programmed embroidery patterns that I can do on my machine. I will have the actual like full pattern that's being made by somebody else because I can't do that for the life of me right now, or yet. I don't have the software for it. But it looks pretty good. I just used tearaway embroidery backing on this. And yeah, I had to sew this to a bigger piece of fabric to get it to fit in the hoop because it's a very teeny piece of fabric. But it looks pretty good, so I'm very happy, and I'm glad it's going to embroider just fine. It's going to look really good. So this is the Jester jacket pattern so far. It goes pretty far down. It's probably about a little over below the knee. It's like an empire waisted thing. I haven't patterned out the sleeve yet, but I'm planning on having some either pleats or gathers towards the back, and probably 2 back pattern pieces. And there's no color because there's going to be a hood, and I already have a hood pattern, so I didn't pattern that out yet. There's going to be 3 closures on the front here, and then embroidery all over. So yeah, that's the pattern. Alright, so I have done one full embroidery test, and now I have moved that up, and I'm going to test the spacing between that first embroidery, and I'm going to start a second embroidery so I can test how this does with multi-hooping. I've got my patterns done, so I'm going to start cutting fabric soon, and we'll see where we're at in a little bit. So obviously the first step of this process was to pattern, and I used muslin to drape out my dress form and make my bodice pattern and figure out the bottom length and width. I needed to do this drafting first to make sure I ordered enough fabric because I am terrible at fabric math. Turns out I'm still terrible at fabric math because I definitely over-ordered, but better too much than too little. To make this coat, I needed about 2.5 yards of the fashion layer and lining, and I ended up getting 4 of each, so overkill, but worth. Now, I need to figure out what else I can make for the fabric, but that's beside the point. The trim required about 2/3 of a yard of fabric, which was nicely provided by Shannon Fabrics. So while I was waiting for that fabric, I started testing out my embroidery pattern that Beleaf Cosplay made. It went through a couple iterations for the final version. I have an embroidery machine, obviously, but I am an embroidery nooblet, and I don't have the software to do it. So I was very lucky that they were willing to do this for me. This is actually the first time I've used my big hoop, which is 360 millimeters by 200 millimeters. Design works well in this hoop and also in a 260 by 200 hoop. Design is about 245 millimeters by 110 millimeters on my big hoop, or about 10 inches by 4¼ inches for my fellow non-metric heathens. I wouldn't recommend using a smaller hoop as you'll lose detail, but the embroidery pack does have the design for a 180 by 130 hooping. This is also my first time ever multi-hooping, so I made sure to do a multi-hooping test, which you saw me explaining, to figure out where the previous design needed to land in the hoop for the designs to line up and not overlap and look good. I did goof a couple of times on the actual coat with small overlaps, but I doubt anyone will notice or care, and I don't, because looks good regardless. Okay, so I've got in, this is kind of messed up a little bit, but it's okay because these are tests. So I've gotten 2 done just to kind of see what the final result is going to look like, and I'm pretty happy. I'm gonna do a slight adjustment of a couple of the spacing measurements between the 2. I'm just gonna move it up and over ever so slightly. So like I'm gonna move this in the hoop over like literally like 3 millimeters. Oh, he's back. Come on, man. That's a camera. Come on. I'm trying to film, dude. I'm literally just gonna move this over 3 millimeters and down in the hoop 3 or 4 millimeters, just to make this a little bit closer together. But other than that, it looks pretty good. So this is gonna go as a border around everything on the coat. So it's gonna be a fun time, and I'm gonna have to. Come on, man. Oh, overall, happy. I'm going to start cutting stuff now. I've got my bodice pattern on the lining fabric. I'm gonna cut it out kind of big and baste it together just to check sizing and then cut it down, and then I think I'm pretty much good to go and start cutting everything else. That's a great angle. Okay, so I went ahead and put the bodice together yesterday. I just did a fitting, and then I cut basically all the pieces by 1/2 inch in because it was too big. So I had originally cut this out too big just to make sure that my pattern pieces were correct, that it wasn't going to be too tight, but it was going to be nice and fitted. And then I serged all the edges because this material likes to fray, even though this is going on the inside, so I didn't really have to serge it, but I did it anyway. So the bodice, this is the lining. So basically I just did the lining first to test everything out, make sure everything was good. Nothing's been pressed yet, so yeah. So I'm just gonna keep going. I'm gonna cut out the rest of the lining, get the sleeves done, get the hood, and the rest of the bottom of the jacket, and then I'll start with the fashion layer. Whilst we have a montage of me cutting things out, I'd like to talk to you about proper planning, because I did not properly plan the embroidery and the jacket length and measurements. If you were doing this properly, you would take the length of the design and the width of the design into account when patterning your garment. I didn't, and I got really lucky that everything fit, and for the most part everything looks good and the design worked out really, really well. But don't be me. Don't do as I do as I say. And make sure that your garment's measurements fit your design. Because this design was not meant to be in any particular part of the garment, it's just a repeating design, so it's not meant to be on any specific edge. I ended up having to partially sew the garment together before starting the embroidery, and then adding muslin around the edges to stabilize the pattern in the hoop, to stabilize the fabric so that I could actually, do the pattern. So, yeah. Okay, so what I've done is I've put the hood and the back and the chest together, sort of. This is all to do the embroidery, and then I've added on some just muslin around the edges so that I can center my embroidery and have enough fabric to go all in the hoop, make sure everything is stretched out real nice and supported. And I'm gonna go ahead and get this hooped and hopefully start the embroidery today. So I got the hoop placement worked out, I think. So we're gonna start and see where this goes. I took the audio off this clip because it's just chunk, 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 and you don't really need to hear that repeatedly. So just enjoy some embroidery close-ups. So this was my stopping point last night. I got 2 designs done. What I need to do now is take the... my machine is turning on. I need to take the muslin off the top and the side here and reposition it down, and I probably need to add the side panel down here, sew that on before I start in on the next embroidery panel. So I'm not going to film a lot of the embroidery because it's the same thing over and over and over, but this took 4 hours. So I'm looking forward to many more hours of that. So here's where I'm at as of the end of the day yesterday. I think I have 2 more hoopings before this front piece is done. I am assembling this, or I'm embroidering this after it's been partially assembled because I need the embroidery to go over seams. It's making it a little bit more difficult to embroider. Instead of doing the stitch out just on the fabric and then cutting the fabric, I'm cutting the fabric first and then doing the stitch out. So you can see here I have a piece of muslin that's just temporarily stitched on to the edge so that I can stretch this over my hoop appropriately and put tension on the fabric. I'm also using a tearaway stabilizer on the back, and I'm not using stabilizer on the front. I could probably get away with like a washable stabilizer, but I'm not doing that. If you do this and you have tension issues, I would recommend doing a stabilizer both on the front and the back, but as of right now, I'm getting away with just stabilizer on the back. So I'm using a pretty heavy-duty paper tearaway stabilizer on the back. And I'm going to take this off the mannequin and do more stitch outs. Despite not filming a lot of the embroidery process, I am filming some of it so you can see what I do. I have to change the hoop size, get my pattern out of the files that are saved on my machine, and for the one side I have to flip it, so I have a little button that allows me to flip my design, and then start the hooping process. When hooping, I'm using a heavy-duty paper stabilizer on the back, and positioning the hoop for the next hooping, so this is lots of multi-hooping, kind of became second nature after I'd done this about 6 or 7 times. I figured out the measurements were that the design had to be a certain number of centimeters down and a certain number of centimeters over. But after a while, I could just kind of eyeball it. I did still measure, but it's pretty easy to figure out the hoopings once you've been doing it for a while. So I get it all nice and positioned, make sure everything is nice and flat, and then lay the top of the hoop over the bottom of the hoop, make sure everything's tensioning properly. This was kind of hard to hoop just because the wool is really thick. And also please note that the wool is stretchy, so if you pull it really super tight, it is going to stretch out and warp. So make sure not to actually pull the wool too tight. Everything hooped up, I click it into the embroidery arm and hit go. I do have to monitor the embroidery while it's going because the tension can get a little wonky sometimes, and I have to back it up, which actually happened here. And also I have to change the color every time the design changes color on the machine or on the stitch out. Now, this is the joys of having a single needle machine. I'm grateful that I have the machine in the first place and can do this, but it's a little time intensive and I can't just let this go and come back to it 2 hours later. So the whole stitch out process does take about an hour and a half to 2 hours to hoop, get it on the machine, get the stitch out done, and then to take all of the excess stabilizer off the back, to trim the jump threads on the front and trim the jump threads on the back, and get everything set up for the next hooping. This jacket took 20 stitch outs, so that's about 40 hours worth of embroidery on my end, which is a lot. So if you are considering doing this coat for yourself or doing the more cosplay accurate version, which is going to require more stitch outs, be prepared that this is going to take a long time. I mentioned jump threads. This particular design does not cut the threads in between design elements, so you are going to have to trim jump threads. I did this basically after every color pass, and I made sure to trim the particularly long threads so that they wouldn't get caught in any of the other design elements, and I just cleaned it up as it went. This made my workload a little bit faster, easier, and I would recommend trimming jump threads after each element. I didn't take it off the embroidery arm, I just left it on and trimmed with a pair of small thread trimming scissors. You don't have to trim the jump threads after every color pass, but I did, and I would recommend doing that. After about a week of embroidery, the jacket was finally ready to be fully assembled. It was partially sewed because of the embroidery process, but I needed to put in the pleats in the back and sew up any of the seams that were not yet sewed, install the sleeves, etc. I ended up doing 3 pleats on each side on the back, and that was pretty good for me. If you're doing this for yourself and you just want to gather it, I think that would work really well as well. Just keep in mind that the wool is pretty thick, and if you're doing gathers, it is going to be a little bit more difficult than doing pleats. So I went with pleats. Pleated it up, got everything pinned, did some fittings, made sure everything was placed where I wanted it, replaced some of the pleats, and sewed this thing together.
I decided to top stitch the seams on the back of the jacket to help those seams lie flat and to also give the back some decorative stitching. The back is pretty plain compared to the front, so just to jazz it up a bit, I went ahead and top stitched the center seam and the 2 side seams on the back. Once the outer fashion layer was done, I sewed the inner lining layer in the exact same way as the outer fashion layer, omitting some of the extra decorative details that I put on the outer fashion layer. It's on the inside, no one's going to see it except for me. And the lining and the outer fashion layer are just going to be flatlined together basically, and then the raw edges are going to be hidden with the fur trim. To install the lining, I did do some hand stitching on the inside of stitching the lining into the outer fashion layer to secure it at the waistband and at the neckline. I do have some footage of that, so you're going to see me doing a little bit of hand sewing and then getting ready to install all of the outer fur trim. First of all, this fabric from Shannon Fabrics is so soft. It's so nice. It's a faux fur, and I ended up using 5-inch wide strips for the cuffs, and the trim are on the rest of the jacket. When cutting faux fur, cut the fur with a craft knife or a box cutter. Don't cut it with scissors like I did. Once again, do as I say, not as I do. Cutting it with scissors was a bad idea. There's fluff everywhere. With fur this short, I don't have to worry about stubbing the fabric and stubbing the fur, but it is gonna make a mess. I had to vacuum everything so much. If you cut it with a box cutter, it's going to shed a lot less and you'll have less cleanup to do and it will not get everywhere like it got everywhere with me. But, you know, I'm just going for speed and then making more work for myself, so that was me. The embroidery process stretched out the wool a little bit, thus it was a little bit longer than my lining layer, which actually ended up working out for me because I wanted the fur to be up in the coat a bit so that it would be nice and warm around the edges and have a bit more fur lining to the garment. What I ended up doing to install the cuffs was whip stitching the edge of the faux fur onto the edge of the lining in the sleeve. And once I whip stitched that all together, I folded the fur over the fashion layer and then blind hemmed the fur onto the fashion layer. The fur ends up hiding a lot of the stitching, so if you're hand stitching this in, it looks like you haven't put any stitches in it. It's real great. Okay, time to install the trim around the rest of the coat. Oi, this was a longer process than the sleeves. I started by basting the coat fashion layer and the lining layer together all around the outside edge to keep them in place while stitching on the fur trim. I ended up machine stitching on the trim at the edge by putting the right side of the fur together with the right side of the garment, and then flipping the fur over and whip stitching, blind hemming the fur in by hand on the inside. That took 3 hours. It was a long time. I'm pretty sure I watched Lord of the Rings in its entirety. I think it was Return of the King? Yeah. Once I put the trim in, adding the closures on the front was the last thing to do. And I did not record that because I was mad at the closures and it took a while, and I don't know what it is with installing closures on garments, but they always take me forever, and then I procrastinate, and then I just get mad. So once the closures were on, it was done, and I have some really awesome footage of me frolicking in the snow and some great close-ups of the coat, so enjoy the finished product.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I will see you folks in the next one.